I'd very much like to welcome Mr. Gerry Edwards, Chair of Terminations for Medical Reasons Ireland, and Ms. Claire Cullen-Delsall, also from Terminations for Medical Reasons Ireland. And I now call on Ms. Cullen-Delsall to make your presentation. Thank you. Good evening.
I'll open if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I assume it's the other way around. Yeah. Ladies first.
Okay, we'd like to thank Senator Noon and this committee for extending us an invitation to present to you today. We're a group of parents, we're mums and we're dads, who've all been affected by pregnancies where there was a diagnosis of a severe or a fatal fetal anomaly. We were all denied access to the care that we needed as a direct result of the 8th Amendment. Many of us had to travel to another country to access the care that we needed, while others among us were forced to continue our pregnancies in Ireland against our will. All of us were forced to endure suffering above and beyond the loss of our babies because of the constraints that this amendment placed upon us and our caregivers. We've also been providing emotional support to other women and families who have faced into similar tragedies and journeys for many years now, and we're privileged that some of them have entrusted their stories to us so that we could share those with you today. But it's not just us who are behind the stories that we describe to you and the circumstances that we'll outline. Behind everything that we discuss with you, there are bereaved parents and bereaved families, and we trust that you'll all afford them the dignity and respect that they deserve. We hope that our submission document and the contribution we make here today will help each of you to arrive at a fully informed position as you make your own recommendations at the end of this process. We think it would be appropriate for us to start by looking at the events which lead to us having to make what is without doubt the most difficult decision of our lives, a decision which is deeply personal. This is a fairly high-level view of it, but we've provided much more detail in our main report. Most of us received the first indication that there was any problem with our baby's developments at the big scan, the anomaly scan, which typically takes place between 19 and 22 weeks of gestation. There are some others who may have had a history of fetal anomaly or who are at increased risk, who get earlier scans, or some who pay for additional testing themselves. But I think it's important to note that a lot of women do not have access to these tests at all. Only about half of pregnant women in Ireland are offered anomaly scans, and we've heard this week that access to scans in Galway are due to be scaled back later this year or early next year. I'm sure you don't need us to tell you how much of a shock it is to be really excited about your pregnancy in the one moment, only to have a doctor tell you that there may be a serious problem in the next. In some cases, further tests may need to be performed to get a confirmed diagnosis. There may be need to refer to other specialties, like cardiologists, paediatricians and neurologists. It can take several weeks to schedule all of these tests and get results back. And in some cases, we may need to have them repeated over a period of time to see whether or not the prognosis for our babies is improving or disimproving. Eventually, our doctors will sit down with us and they'll explain in good faith and based on their personal experience what they believe is the most likely outcome for our pregnancy. That our babies are going to die, or that they will have a very seriously compromised quality of life. This prognosis will be based upon the results of our tests, what they've learned through their own professional experience, and the specific manner in which these anomalies have affected our babies. This is devastating news to hear. Our hearts are broken and our world stops. But it's really important that doctors are frank and honest when they deliver this prognosis to us. It's important that they don't sugarcoat the news with euphemisms, because we must have a clear understanding of what our baby faces, and indeed what we face, so that we can accept and understand the reality of the situation and make an informed decision on how best to proceed. The decision to either continue with or terminate a pregnancy in these circumstances is a very difficult one for most people. To make it, we need the best information available to us. We need to be able to discuss all of the options available to us with our own medical teams. And I think most importantly, we need the personal time and space to arrive at the decision that we believe is best for our baby, for us, and for our families. So I think it's really important to point out at this stage that it is simply not possible for families to get that level of information, to process it, and to arrive at a decision which is best for them within a 22-week gestational limit, bearing in mind that those that get news at all may only be receiving an indication that something may be wrong at around about that time. So we propose that the 22-week limit that was recommended by the Citizens' Assembly be set aside in your considerations, and that there should be no time limit with regard to fetal, or maternal health. We all want to hold on to the hope for as long as we can, but nobody should be rushed, and nobody should be judged for coming to the point where hope ends. For those of us who chose to terminate our pregnancies and were forced to travel to lose our babies, we were basically left to our own devices. Because our doctors can't do it for us, we had to find and contact overseas hospitals ourselves. We had to make our own appointments, get copies of our own medical records, and find fax machines, which is something that's becoming increasingly difficult to do. We have to make our own travel arrangements. Do we go by plane, or do we take a boat and drive? How will we get from the airport or the ferry port to the hospital? Who will travel with us? If we already have children at home, who's going to look after them? How do we get time off work? Do we even have a passport? And can we even afford it? It's also worth pointing out that when we travel for an induced labour and delivery, we have no way of knowing how long this is going to take, so we can't book a return journey. We have to wait until the process is over and then make separate arrangements again. This adds to both stress and cost for the families involved. And I think it's really worth, in that context, reflecting on the words of Justice Horner when he said that forcing women to travel in these circumstances can have the consequence of imposing an intolerable financial and mental burden upon those least able to bear it. He said the protection of morals should not contemplate a restriction that bites on the impoverished but not the wealthy, that smacks of one law for the rich and one law for the poor. And I don't believe that anybody in Ireland would support that type of inequality today. At times when we were experiencing our most intense grief, we found ourselves in another country, often having left Ireland in secret, feeling like medical refugees. We were abandoned by Ireland, by the state and by its people. We were isolated from our family and friends. We were separated from the medical team who looked after us up to that point. And after the procedure, when we're returning home, we need to try and figure out, can we bring our babies home with us? And if so, how? If we have a car, we can bring the baby home on the boat. But this involves having to go to a supermarket and buy freezer packs, kind of like the ones you use for sports injuries that you'd snap. And we have to stop at regular intervals on the homeward journey in petrol stations or supermarket car parks, open the coffin and change these packs so that our babies' remains can be kept cool. And this is so that we can present our babies to their siblings and their grandparents and their aunts and uncles when we return home before a funeral. When we cross the Irish Sea, we have to leave our baby in their coffin in the car, either in the back seat covered in a blanket or in the boot. If we're coming home by ferry and we don't have a car, we have to use public transport. We'd have to carry coffins on trains and buses from Liverpool or Manchester, Birmingham, London to Holyhead and carry our coffins onto a Senna ferry. This is just inhuman. If we're flying, we may be able to bring our babies' remains home with us, but we have to check with the airlines in advance and speak to their special assistance staff. We might need to put the coffin in a hold-all or a suitcase and have it checked in. And this leaves us in a position where we're having to trust baggage handlers to treat our dead babies with the respect that they deserve. And a lot of people are afraid that that simply won't happen. And it would also mean that we could have to collect our babies' remains from a carousel in an airport in Dublin or Cork or Shannon or Galway or even Knock, or else take the coffin, a small coffin, onto the plane as hand luggage. These are all circumstances that women and families are having to go through literally within hours of giving birth. Women from this country have had to go through the normal trauma of delivery, the utter grief of losing a much wanted baby, and then take on this type of a journey. How do you think that makes people in this country feel? Would you be comfortable with your own family members or your own neighbours having to make a journey like that? Sometimes we can't bring our babies home. We may need to get an autopsy or a post-mortem to get the results of genetic testing so that we can get information about considering future pregnancies. Because we're not in Ireland and because we're not NHS patients, we have to pay up to £900 sterling for an autopsy. We then have to arrange cremation, which we may or may not be able to attend because that involves having to make another trip to the UK or further afield. And then we still have to bring our babies' ashes home to their family. Specialist courier services are charging at the moment between £800 and £900 sterling for delivery of cremated remains. So most people travel back to the UK to collect them. And this creates a lot of additional trauma. Apart from the cost and apart from that, you have to get back through airport security with a box with your baby's cremated remains. That involves very often the dads having to send the mums through ahead of them because they know they're going to be stopped when the box with powder shows up on the security scanner, and they're going to have to explain the origin of that box and why they're travelling home. And when we get home, if we get our babies home, we have more logistics. How do you arrange a funeral when you're not coming from a hospital in Ireland? Can you get a priest to officiate? Some people are afraid to tell their priests the truth about what happened because they're afraid they'll be judged or condemned, and others just simply don't want to lie, so they forego the religious ceremony. Not being able to bring our baby home and not being able to have a normal funeral service with the support of our family, friends and community further compounds the sense of isolation and abandonment that we feel. This is a process which is important not just for the parents to get closure, but for grandparents, siblings and other family members too. It makes it almost impossible for us to grieve normally and leads to more traumatic, complicated and disenfranchised grief than would be expected if we were properly supported throughout this entire process.